everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Betty's Smart Friends. I'm Betty Wang, your host. Today, we'll be talking about the financial aspects of divorce, which are especially complicated after long marriages with a lot of jointly accumulated assets. There's a growing trend called gray divorce that involves couples over the age of 50 ending their marriages due to various factors like empty nest syndrome, financial issues, infidelity, and simply growing apart. Over 60% of gray divorces are initiated by women. If you or a loved one are in this situation, there are professionals and resources available to help with the financial side of divorce. We're so lucky to have a financial divorce expert, Audrey Morrison, here with us today to share her knowledge and experience on this topic. Audrey's a certified financial planner and a certified divorce financial analyst. Through her two firms, Karen Financial Advisors and Divorce Financial Strategies, Audrey has dedicated herself to providing resources and financial planning services to divorcing women. Her goal is to help clients take a clear, judgment free look at their finances, set realistic goals, and develop an action plan to achieve the best possible outcomes. Divorce is undoubtedly tough, but financial planning doesn't have to be. Audrey's here to ensure that no one has to go through this journey alone. Please welcome Audrey to the podcast. Hi, Audrey. Thanks for
Hi.
joining us.
Thanks, Betty. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, thank you. Well, let's start today by hearing a little bit more about you and how you got involved in this area of financial planning and how you got started.
Well, I got involved in the area of divorce, specifically divorce financial planning, because I went for a divorce right around '08, '09, during turbulent financial times
Oh,
is when I
yeah.
ended up
That's
getting
a
a
hard
divorce.
time.
so, um, so anyway, I got through that, but it was, quite an experience, and I learned a lot through that. And then you think in life, when you go through something that's difficult, how can I turn this into a positive? So fast forward, I got divorced in '08, '09, like started in '08 and it finalized in '09 in Chicago. And then I was divorced in Chicago with three children, one of whom had special needs. And I really wanted to move away from Chicago. I convinced my ex husband to move to Colorado, and we all moved sort of, you know, all moved to the same area of Denver, which was really nice. And I made friends, and many of them happened to be divorced people. And so, anyway, when I turned 50, I was sort of reevaluating my career, which had been in finance, but mostly in the corporate side of finance, as well as some change management roles. And as I was reevaluating, I was working with a friend, and we were going to start a nonprofit that helped women going through divorce and help them think through the financial and the legal and the emotional aspects, just as a support. And one thing led to another. Since I was reevaluating my career, I thought, well, I'm a finance person. I could, maybe help with the financial aspects. And so then I started to talk to other professionals and learn a little bit about it, and decided to get my CFP, Certified Financial Planner. And then after that, the divorce specialty area. So it's been fantastic. I feel like I've learned a lot, and therefore it makes me feel good to help other, women that are going through those difficult times, and to set themselves up for success and not just feel like they have to go along with whatever their husband is saying, stand up for themselves, fight for what they're entitled to.
Yeah, what should women know about the different approaches to divorce? I mean, again, it is becoming more and more popular as our kids, with older kids, right? They need you a little less, and
Hmm.
you're able to focus on your relationship and a little more. And I think that's part of the reason why these divorces after longer marriages are happening, right? That's what the trend
Right,
has been.
right.
What should women know? What are the different ways you can go about it?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways you can go about it, and I would say if it's amicable, I mean, you certainly can. There are people that like have a do-it-yourself divorce, where, or they call it a kitchen table divorce, where you sort of go through the steps. There's resources online about what you have to do for the process in your state. It varies from state to state. a little bit, but mostly it's the same guidelines where there's financial disclosures, et cetera. And then you have to split your assets, split your debt, think about if there's maintenance involved and those kinds of things. And if it's later in life, there's less children issues, right? Because when it's earlier and your children are younger, that's like a whole component of the divorce and agreeing to the different areas. So if you're fairly amicable, you could try that. That's generally easier when you're just like 22 and been married for a year versus later in life. Mediation is a pretty good way to go, but I also think that having an attorney with the game plan in mind of not necessarily fighting in court, but just so that if each of you has an attorney, they can talk to each other and either go to mediation or sometimes even settle it before mediation, because it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't have to be like um, contentious just because you hire an attorney. And then the other way, if there's any kind of imbalance of power, that's a very big deal either way. If there's an imbalance of power, or if one person has a little bit more like bullyish, kind of attitude, then I think it's really important to get representation, so that somebody's fighting for you and can represent you.
Yeah,
And
that's
then,
really, really good advice. The power imbalance, like people don't think about that.
right. And even if the power imbalance, yeah, so somebody knows a lot about finances, and the other person is not as astute, to have somebody there in their corner to look at things and make sure that they're not being, taken advantage of.
What do you say to women who say they can't afford an attorney? They want to
Yeah.
just
So,
do it themselves because
yeah.
they think it'll be cheaper.
Right. So a couple things. So I'm all for saving money. So I don't. It's not like I want people to spend a lot of money on an attorney. And there's certainly steps people can take to reduce the costs there. Where they do the financial disclosures themselves and et cetera. You can hire attorneys like a la carte, where they're just doing certain things for you instead of taking on your whole case. So I'm all for all the ways that you can save money, but at the same time, especially if there's that imbalance, et cetera, I say you can't afford not to, because people give away too much. They don't understand that they're entitled to certain things. And so then, if you have two people and neither of them has been divorced before, they really don't know how the law works. They don't know how maintenance works and things like that. They don't know how separate property works. And so it's, no, nobody's informed. And it's very important for you to become informed through, and that's what an attorney or a mediator can help you with, or a financial person.
And so, from a financial perspective, at a high level, what should they be looking at? What are things that maybe they should be thinking about doing?
So there's few key areas that are in every divorce. So the one is splitting assets in debt, right? So you're gonna and debt's a big part. You can't just split the assets. And um, so I also think it's important to know what kind of accounts you have. And so if many people have a lot of their money in tax deferred retirement accounts, right? So like generally 401ks are often tax deferred. And so it's better to, when I set that up, I look at things that are tax deferred, tax free, and like taxable accounts, and try to keep it even in each of those categories, like in terms of splitting the assets, within reason. It doesn't have to be exactly even, but you don't want it to be off by hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Sorry.
And so that's one big thing. Another big thing is the debt. So often there's people that are getting divorced now, and they have a super good mortgage rate because they were able to refinance when rates were fantastic. So they have like 3% or even less. And they think that whoever's keeping the house can keep that mortgage rate. And that's just not how it works, unfortunately. Whoever is going to keep the house, if somebody's going to keep the house, they're going to have to refinance and get a new mortgage at the current rates. Often they're then taking extra money out because they have to pay off the other person. But the rates are higher, and so it's a total bummer. But unfortunately, that's the way it has to work, because you don't want to keep that other person on the mortgage. They don't want to be on the mortgage, because then if there's some kind of default or something, then that's in their name too, on their credit. And more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but more practically, they can't get another mortgage usually if they're on one mortgage, because you have to be, pretty wealthy to be able to be afford the two mortgages. That's against their credit, their available credit.
And is this what your CDFA is, the certified divorce analyst? I mean, if they don't certified divorce financial analyst,
Yes.
is that
Also.
so? Is that where a woman would retain your services to help them think through these things? I mean, if somebody doesn't have their own financial advisor at the time, and even if they do,
Yeah.
it's sometimes helpful to have someone who's trained in this, because there are certain, you
Right.
know, little
Specialty
nitpicky
areas.
things
Yes.
that somebody like you who works with divorce all the time could point out.
Right, right. So yes, as a CDFA, I work a lot of different ways depending on the case. So sometimes people are just thinking about divorce, and they want me to, help them go through like how things could look. Right. So here's what we have. How do you think that will look? Will I? They kind of want to ensure that they're not going to be a bag lady, because there's this whole bag lady
Yeah.
syndrome. People are
Oh my
afraid,
gosh. Yeah,
right?
I call it cat lady. Yeah. Eating
They
cat
want
food. Yeah.
they want to make sure before they
Under a
even
bridge. Right.
propose to their husband that they want the divorce. They want to see that they would be, viable option, that they will be okay. Women tend to do more research, you know, uh, when they're thinking about it, kind of preparing. And men tend to be more like they're just finding out kind of as they're going through it. And so I help. So I often work in that capacity, and then sometimes I'll work with somebody that they're going through the divorce, and they want somebody in their corner to work with their attorney. Sometimes attorneys call me in to help on a case if it's a little bit more, financially heavy, or centric, or there's difficult assets and things. And then I often work with a mediator that calls me in when there's more difficult financial situation. Difficult financial situations can involve things like one person owning a business, and or sometimes people own the business together. But when one person owns the business, there's a lot of things that can be hidden there, and the business has to be valuated, because that's an asset. And then there's the whole thing of, it's an asset, but it's also an income source. So, like, where are you counting it? And you don't want to double count it. Um, so those are some of the complex areas. And I also, when there's pensions that have to be evaluated, it's not just the number that's on the pension statement. That's not how you evaluate a pension in a divorce. So there's a special calculation that has to be done to evaluate that. And yeah, some other things are just maintenance and how that can be done, calculated. And there's a thing called contractual maintenance. So, in other words, there's a formula in Colorado, and this maintenance varies from state to state. We have a guideline here it's very helpful, since we've had the guideline. And there's a calculation, but then some people are, instead of saying, okay, I'll collect this maintenance for 10 years, assuming that they had like a 20-year marriage, right? It's usually half of the marriage length. But then as income goes up or down, like, people recalculate it. So often for both parties, they'd rather just have one number, that this is how it's going to be, and not have to recalculate it, or be susceptible to that. And so then we go through and calculate the amount, but then we discount it because it's going to be paid upfront. And so there's some negotiations around that. So those are just a couple of things that come to mind.
And I thought I read, and I don't know if, I mean, is this a myth, that maintenance doesn't continue once you're full retirement age and can start collecting Social Security? Is that true, or?
So that's an excellent question. Excellent. And I've had to investigate that. So first of all, generally speaking, it goes until what an attorney would say is that a judge isn't going to make somebody work beyond full retirement age. So full retirement age, generally speaking, now is 67. And so they could assume that you're going to work until 67 and you're going to earn this much, and so this is what maintenance would be. But sometimes it can go beyond that age, and it's a gray area. So I've looked up the law on that area just to educate myself, and it's sort of a gray area in some cases, but generally it's assumed full retirement age. And
And
when one
that's for the
person has,
person who's paying the maintenance, not the person receiving the maintenance. Or is it the person
it's
is that
assumed the person that's paying it, because they're the ones that have to work, and then they'd be retired, and so then they shouldn't have to pay their Social Security for their ex-spouse. Uh, but I have seen things, especially when things are very unequal, right?
right?
So somebody's got high Social Security, high assets, they're in great shape, and the other person is living, they may not even have Social Security, then they can get half of their ex-spouses, but half is can be pretty low, and certainly not enough to live on, right? Depending on what they got in assets. So I have seen things like that, but it's not common.
What other things have you seen that maybe like myths that people have about divorce or getting divorced? I mean, one is, that it's really expensive to do if you get an attorney, but as you've said, that's kind of not the right, it's too expensive not to have one. But are there
Right.
other
It
things that
plays out.
women come to you with these things that you're like, well, that's not really true, or maybe it's not true anymore, right? I don't know.
Right, right. So maintenance is something that's not well understood,
Yep.
and if your salaries are pretty equal, then there won't be any maintenance. But if a person's salary is one's a lot higher than the other, then it's a calculation that tries to get you to the point where the person that's earning more is getting like 60% of the pot, so to speak, and the person that's earning less is basically getting about 40%. So that's usually how that works out. So then what will happen, and I'm talking now, especially in like a gray divorce where people are closer to retirement, is that they may skew the assets towards the person that's going to have less money, because they don't have that opportunity to increase their career or anything, versus like if it happened earlier in life, the divorce, they don't have time to rebuild afterwards, so they may get more assets at that point. Some of the other things that are not well understood is separate property. So if you went into the marriage and you had a 401k already because you had worked before you got married, the value of that 401k when you got married, that's your separate property. Then any appreciation in that during your marriage, that's considered marital property. And so it's only the marital property that you're breaking, that you're splitting. And also inheritances are considered separate property, but they have to be kept separate. So like, in other words, if somebody inherited something, like money from maybe their parent passed away, if they then use that money to like pay the mortgage on an ongoing basis, or they put it into a joint account, then it's not separate anymore, then it's considered marital property. And
Yeah,
so
I think
sometimes,
I heard someone calling it like it's the chocolate milk situation. If you have a glass of milk and you add any sort of, even if you add just one little drop, then
yeah,
it's muddied or it's
right,
chocolate now.
right. And so that's where, a couple can try to be fair with each other. And in mediation, they can decide, well, that really was yours and you really should have that, and blah, 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 blah. So it's not as if there's, the law overrides everything else. But legally, it's then up for grabs, so to speak. But if you agree in mediation to something, and the attorney, let's say, who's writing it up, the mediator will write it up in such a way, and here's why, so the judge understands and makes a case for it, and it'll generally be approved.
How does it, with people getting divorced later in life, maybe their kids are at the tail end or just entering college? I remember after freshman year of college, I had, just a handful of friends. Their parents were getting divorced, right?
Mhm.
They're empty nesters. How does that typically work for college payments? Is that something that's what do you do? Is there a typical way to handle that, or is that case by case? or they figure that out in mediation?
So what I say, especially if you're, in it, like if you're in it or that close, you want to talk about that in mediation, right? And potentially have that written in. I mean, if they're already in college, if people get married, if people get divorced when their children are not at that point yet, so let's say the kids are just young, they're 5 and 8, then most attorneys won't put that in the agreement, because then it becomes something where if you say you you know husband are going to pay X percent and you wife are going to pay X percent, right? Then it's a case where legally you have to pay that, and the children could actually sue you if you didn't pay a certain amount. So they don't
Oh,
want to get into that, and your circumstances can change, and there's just so many things that are unknown. So they don't generally put that in an agreement, but I think that it's a good thing to talk about, and maybe not put in the agreement, but have a general agreement of, like, we're going to contribute the amount of an in-state school or something like that, just so that you're um, on the same page as to what to expect, because otherwise it's pretty hard to plan. I've worked with a number of people where they don't really know what their ex is going to do in terms
right,
of college, right? And
right,
so
right,
it's a huge unknown, right?
right.
And there are also things to do when you're filling out the FAFSA. The person who earns less should be the person who fills it out. So that's an important thing. The other important thing when you have kids still at home is just understanding and talking about how the extraordinary expenses are going to work for your children, because there's just so many things like car insurance, phones, all those things are sort of called extraordinary. But you need to think about how you're going to split those. And typically it would be that 60-40 ratio, or unless you earn the same, then I guess it would be 50-50. But that's something that needs to be considered when you're going through a divorce, and considered in your budget, because the other big piece besides splitting the assets and the debt is going through your income and expenses. And that's always difficult, because you don't really know what your expenses are going to be afterwards. You're going to be in a new living situation, and you may not know, like, what am I even going to buy? Am I going to rent? How much is that going to cost? But you're supposed to put, and it's confusing when you're filling out the financial disclosures because you don't know that yet. But you're supposed to put what you think it's going to be going forward. And then that's what's going to be important for a financial person to assist you with, or you to do for yourself, to figure out what your budget's going to be and how much you're going to be able to afford in your new life, right? You want to get yourself set up um, so that you're good with cash flow, post divorce, but also that you have enough assets to retire, especially if it's later in life. Because again, you don't have as much time to rebuild after the divorce. So, situating yourself so that you'll be able to be okay for retirement is very important.
So I imagine a lot of your work is around education too, because some women have always taken the back. They know how the cash flow, they know what they're spending, but they're not really involved when it comes to investments or the long term retirement planning.
Hmm.
Um, so
Right.
I, there's a lot of
Projections, right?
yeah.
Projections of what it's going to look like, and what is your social security,
Hmm.
and understanding what your husband's social security is as well. That should be part of the disclosure, so that you know how that works. And again, you can, if you've been married for more than 10 years, then you're entitled to half of your um, ex ex husband or ex wife's social security, if it's more than yours, if half of theirs is more than yours. um, but that's not a lot of money,
No,
you know.
I mean Social Security is supposed to prevent you from being, impoverished,
Right.
but yeah, it's really not that. It's not enough to live on to
Half of
most.
it's pretty low, yeah.
Yeah, half of it's pretty low. What other unique things do you see with older couples getting divorced? Other considerations that may be different than say if you're in your 20s or early 30s.
um Health insurance obviously is a big deal. And if one spouse is able to go on Medicare and the other one's not old enough, then and they're not working, then that can be difficult. They're really going to have to go on the Affordable Care Act, ACA, because they're not going to be able to, um, depending. Usually, you have the option to be on the insurance, after post divorce. But if the other person's not working, then that's not there. So that
Yeah.
so when there's the age difference, that can really affect people as well. Um, Having a business to sell, that's a difficult one, right? Because you don't really know what it's going to sell for. And it could be an upside, but there also could be a downside too, right? So everybody's sort of hedging your bets. It's a
Right, right.
little bit
Well,
of a
I mean, you're
gamble.
trying, yeah.
Yeah.
You're trying to diversify the risk and the reward, I guess.
Right. And if there's stock options, that's a thing where you're not legally allowed to put that in the other person's name. So if it's more amicable, generally people do split those, and it'll just be still in the one spouse's name. And then when they come due, they just split them, evenly for those years that they agree upon, right? When it's not amicable, it's a whole different, thing. Then you would still want to incorporate it in the value of the marital estate, but you'd have to, I guess, plan to get it from elsewhere, take the money from somewhere else, because you're really balancing out the different assets. um, and again, the value of that won't be known, right? So you're making a gamble on that. So those are some of the tough things. um, yeah, selling the house is always difficult, figuring out. So often people, especially women, want to keep the house,
Yeah,
and it's not always the best choice, right?
right.
Because uh, it's an asset, and sure, it grows in value, but it's not cash, and cash is king in a divorce, right? You need the actual money. And often, you have to put money into a house versus, it providing cash for you. So it's usually um, better, I think, you know, to not have that big asset. The other piece of it too is that you only get so much of a deduction for when you sell it. Then, so if you bought your house a while ago and it's already gone up, 400,000, right? If you guys sell it now, you'll each be able to not have to have a gain on that. But if now you're gonna like hold on to it and sell it in 5 or 10 years, then you're going to make 400 or 500,000 gain, and you're only going to be able to exclude 250,000 from paying tax on. So it doesn't, it's not necessarily a good money decision, math decision, even
Yeah,
though it
and
has
that's right. We know that the math doesn't always win
right.
in these
Sometimes your
decisions.
emotions and you're tied
Yes.
to things, and you
Hmm.
feel bad because of your kids are away at college, and that,
Right.
they want some familiarity and this and that. So sometimes you can decide, okay, well, we'll keep the house for 2 or 3 years, and then we'll sell it together. People do things like that, but you just have to, usually that works if it's a very limited time. It doesn't work if it's going to be like a long time.
Yeah, that makes
So,
sense. So let's say a woman is contemplating divorce after 25 years of marriage. Like, where do they start? I mean, what you said, women tend to look online. Do you have good resources there? Um, do they reach out to a CDFA or an attorney first after or do they do both ideally? I mean, in an ideal situation, what what would you, because if you've never been divorced, you don't
you
like
don't know,
you
right?
don't you wouldn't know where to start.
You
So
don't
it's
even know
like,
what
who
you
are the
don't
right
know.
people that should get involved? Um, and I do think for some women, calling an attorney right away would feel like too big of a step, right?
Right, right. I do have a lot of women that like they come to me, and it's kind of before they want to talk to an attorney, because they want to understand the finances and the math first. Or you can consult with an attorney, but if you're not going to file, then there's still that homework piece you'll want to do of like figuring that all out. If that's your style. I mean, if you feel confident, you're going to do it, you can certainly then jump right in um, and then go through it, right? But I just know from my experience working with people that a lot of women in particular want to make sure first, like see
Right.
the math first and see how it could work out and understand how the laws are. And I do think, because I work with a lot of people post divorce as well, that I haven't worked with during their divorce, and you know, that's tougher if you see where they made decisions that weren't ideal, right?
Can you give
So
examples of those? I mean, obviously, like a big one is that sometimes attorneys will just split the pot at a high level, but not take into consideration
the
the
tax
taxability of the assets,
ramifications, yeah.
right? I would
Another
imagine that's a bigger one.
another thing that attorneys don't seem to focus on very much, but if you still have kids, you want to think about who's going to get to claim head of household, right?
Yeah,
And so if you have more than two children, if you have two children or more, then you can split your children and say, okay, you're going to claim one child and I'll claim the other, and we both get to claim head of household. But that can make a big difference in your taxes, right? So
yeah.
so that's a big deal. So if you're earning more money, especially you want to be able to have that head of household deduction. So so I always like address that, like, and see who it's going to be better for, and kind of work through that. um
Because you don't necessarily, for you, sometimes you're hired by the couple to look at things, right? Or
Sometimes
are
I'm hired
you,
by the couple, and
right?
sometimes I'm hired by a mediator, and I'm a financial neutral, so I just
Yeah,
say this will be better for you know you, James, and this will be better for you, Jane, and like I let them both know like how it could work. um right. So yeah,
are
I
there
don't.
other big like mistakes that, I mean, I think
um
the keeping the house, as you've talked about, like,
Keeping the house, the separate in the marital property, and then maintenance.
yeah,
Because a lot of times, people don't want to pay maintenance. The person is earning more, and they don't think they should have to. Sometimes it's just because they think, well, I'm earning it. I worked hard, blah 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 blah. But the person that stayed at home,
right.
or didn't, work there, that's considered that was their agreement, and they both were supporting that career 50-50. So so people, especially, that person might, the one that's not working is often the one that's doesn't have the power in the relationship, and
Right.
so they think that they're going to agree to it, and they think they need to, or they should, and so I think it's important for people to understand that they're entitled to that, and to work through those calculations so that they know what they're giving up if they, say, oh, I don't want it, I don't need
Well,
it.
especially since it's really hard to go back and change things,
Can't
right?
change them, right? You really can't. Like, it's exceptional. It has to be like some sort of like malpractice kind of thing, where you've gotten bad advice. So
So essentially, if they can, they should reach out to someone like you before they actually sign anything, if
sign,
not
yeah,
before that, in the planning piece of it, because you can prevent or at least point out different issues
right. And I always
before.
tell people, right, if they're in mediation, they may go to mediate a mediator together. And so they haven't hired attorneys, and they have a mediator, they're guiding them through it. But before they sign that agreement, they should have somebody look at that, like an attorney, that they can pay like a la carte just to review it, to make sure that they're not making a big mistake, and to also make sure things are clear, because that's the other thing is sometimes people get divorced and they've gone through certain, they've addressed what came to mind, but there's other pieces that they're just missing, and so then later those things happen, and then they don't really, it's unclear as to how exactly they're going to deal with them, and then other big things are the pension, right? And so does the person get to keep the pension, or sometimes attorneys, I've seen this, like attorneys don't really know how to value it and everything. So they'll just say, okay, well, you just split the pension 50-50. Well, that's not necessarily the best thing for, either party. It depends on the circumstances and what other resources there are. But I definitely wouldn't just say split it 50-50. I'd value it. And then,
Right.
then you'd have that number, right? And you can kind of figure out what the next best step is. Um, so I'm I'm trying to think of all the different
Well,
things
yeah,
that
you probably
goes on.
come across a lot of different situations. What should be are you only able for your particular practice, are you only able to work in Colorado? Does that, so if you're looking for a CDFA or I mean, I would say, I mean, I'm a certified financial planner, but I would say that you have much more experience and in-depth knowledge when it comes to divorce. I mean, I think having a financial planner is great, but when you're going through something as specific and that changes, right? The rules change all the time. It's
Mhm.
probably in your best interest to also bring in, and I would assume that most financial planners would be okay with that, right? You want
Yeah,
somebody advocating for your client who knows the idiosyncrasies of, especially in within your state, right? Because
right.
it's all different.
And the thing is, like, if you are a couple that has a financial planner, but that financial planner is representing both of you,
Yeah.
then that's a little bit of a dangerous situation to have that person giving advice, right? They often, most financial planners don't want to get involved in that, right? Because it's tricky. Like, they should not be talking to just one spouse and not the other, right? Because then that would be like unfair, right? And they're there to represent both of you if you hired
Right.
them as a couple, right? So often they would, want you to talk to a specialist, and then afterwards, some financial planners feel strongly like that now I should just work with one person and not both, because there can be situations where, you know, I'm working with John, and John, he canceled his insurance policy, and I haven't, I'm not going to tell Mary, and
Yeah.
like they're stuck in the middle of that kind of a thing, so
Yeah.
it can be pretty difficult. So that's just something to think about as well, uh, so yeah, I've certainly worked with other people's clients just through the divorce piece of it.
And do you only practice with it for the divorce piece within Colorado?
No, I've helped people outside of Colorado, so there's some states where I'm more familiar with the law, but I also have resources to look it up, and I have software that works with like a number of states with their laws. There's like 30 states, I think, in the software, so that's helpful as well. So I've helped people in other states as well.
So if they're not able to, you know, work with you, I know you're busy, but
Mhm.
reach out and see. But if they're not able, what's the gold standard for a woman to look for if they want to work with someone like you? Is it the CDFA?
Yeah, it
Is
would be the
it
CDFA, and they have a resource where you can look up and find CDFAs that are close to you. There's it's Institute of Divorce Financial Analysts, IDFA. But if you just Googled find a CDFA, it will come up. And there's like I'll put in my state, find somebody close to me, and then there'll be a list of people, and you can choose one that appeals to you. You think you would feel good working with. So yeah, and the thing is, in Colorado and Denver, Boulder area, I know of attorneys and things like that, so that's helpful. And then attorneys know about judges in their area, so that's what's helpful when you're working with local people, right? They might be more familiar with the resources in that particular area, um, or judges and the way they tend to look at things.
how does that? Can you walk us through how you work with a person? So say one person retains you, how do you work with their professional team, which is presumably at least an attorney, right? But sometimes maybe a financial advisor slash planner and also a CPA. Like
Yeah.
how do you where do you fit into that?
Yeah, so I would work. And so it's interesting. Like, sometimes the attorney might even hire me, right? So then I'm working very closely with the attorney. But other times we'll just like reach out and go through certain meetings with the attorney where we're here's what we would like to see in a settlement, right? And explain why, and then that attorney is bringing that to either the other attorney or the mediation, so they're kind of understanding the case, and we go through it myself, the client, and the attorney all together to come up with that strategy, and that's the way that it works. Um, I've worked with CPAs just, often when people are going to sell the house. So the CPA is intimate, kind of knows your tax situation, right? From because you've with them as a couple. And so hopefully then in the year that you're getting divorced, is if you both trust that CPA, then we can work with that CPA to figure out like what your taxes should be, kind of based on kind of allocating them, right? Based on who's earning what and who's getting what deductions, or you might have a loss carry forward or something like that, and who should get that. That's another thing that you need to think about. It's an asset to have a loss carry forward on your taxes. And so you want to, negotiate that as part of the divorce as well. So I don't typically like in terms of like person's financial planner. I guess I would just work with them to find out, what assets uh, and liabilities the person has, that kind of thing. Um, and if there's any questions that came up, because some people have unique types of investments, right? And so
Yeah.
that gets a little bit trickier to understand unique things that are not like, in the market. So, and again, the other thing is business valuators, because if you have a business, then there's all sorts of valuation things that have to happen, and that can be tricky. That's can be very, very tricky.
I can see that being very, very tricky for sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's all really, really helpful. Is there anything that you want to share that women thinking about divorce later in life should think about or
Well,
know
the
about
other
before
piece,
they,
yeah, the other piece is just the emotional piece, right?
yeah,
Because it's stressful, and
yeah,
just to know that there's a lot of people going through it, and oftentimes you can find a support group, maybe through if you have a therapist, but maybe just through Meetup, or I don't know if Facebook does that, but just in your area there might be some sort of support group of women that have gone through divorce, and that can be extremely beneficial, and that can also help you find a really good financial planner, really good lawyer, a mediator. I mean, women tend to share those resources, right? And then they hear stories from each other too, of like, this person was fantastic, right? And or this is what happened to me in my case, and women share like that. I guess the one other thing that I forgot to bring up that I should just mention is, I said typically the children aren't a big issue in a divorce when you're close to retirement later in life. But if you have a disabled child, then that's a whole different story, and that can really be a difficult case to work through. And you want to get the right help to figure out how that should work. If one or both
yeah,
parents are still going to stay involved in this, this child has ongoing needs. So
yeah, that's a good point.
yeah,
Well,
so lots to think
women would be so lucky to have you, all,
about.
and you have the empathy, you have the whole package.
I love working with women going through divorce and women post divorce, and so often like they just feel so empowered after the divorce. It's I'm not gonna lie, it's very difficult to go through no matter what, no matter how
Yeah,
amicable it is. There's going to be grief there because it's not, even if you don't like your person you're divorcing, you still had an expectation of what your life was going to be like, and so you're
absolutely.
grieving that. And but then post divorce, so often you see women just come to life and really become empowered, and it's great, you know.
That's awesome.
So
Well, I do like to ask closing questions for all the folks who are on my podcast, and that is, especially with what you're doing, you're around people going through these stressful, painful, emotional life events. How do you maintain your own personal balance and peace?
um I think just through having good quality time with my friends, to be able to talk about things, and having people to share things with, and that kind of thing. Taking time for myself to, sharing good friendships and doing fun things together.
Hmm, that's nice. And then my last question is, you- I mean, you and I have talked about this as financial advisors who work with folks who are retiring. Studies show that hobbies, interests outside of your profession, or, for women who may have stayed at home for their children, right?
Mhm.
What are some interests and hobbies that you do? You know, they find that these people who have interests and hobbies going into retirement are so much happier, right? They're more
Right.
content. And so I think some of us have been so involved with raising our children or in work or in both that we really haven't thought about these things. Are there hobbies or interests that you do that might be
I'm exactly at that point because I
right?
just became the empty nester. But I for sure really like to hike
Yeah.
and be outside and bike. And I like bike some and I garden, and I hike a lot. Go to the mountains. And yeah, and have fun with my dog. And I just got a new paddleboard kayaks that I'm hoping
Oh,
I'm going to do more of. So, and then spending quality time with friends. And I have a book club and things like that. But I do think that, right, they've even shown it, right, that
yeah.
women friendships are the most important things, both for women and for men.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that having, friends that you can share, both the good times and the bad times with really makes a big difference to in our quality of life and our ability to get through the tough times and enjoy the good times. And yeah, as far as hobbies, I haven't, so that's what I have now. But then I always wonder, oh, should I start knitting or should I start doing this? Those kinds of things I haven't figured out yet.
Yeah. 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 Well, no, I mean,
I don't have enough time yet, I guess.
yeah. Well, I mean, doing all those things takes time, and
Yeah,
it's just good to sort of think about what's out there,
yeah.
and
And I have been
you
traveling
pick what you
more, so
like.
that's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, it's nice to be able
Where
to do
can
that.
women find? Where's the best place to find you or contact you if they're trying to get in touch?
Yeah, on the internet, and
Yeah.
I think I have a website for the two businesses, which you can have a link to, right?
Okay.
And yeah, sending me an email is great. There's a place on the website where you can do that, or Betty will put the link out there for
Yeah.
my email, and then
Yeah.
yeah, we could set up a time to talk. There, I do a free 30-minute introductory call where we just talk about what might make sense if it makes sense to work together, and yeah.
Okay. Well,
So
thank you so much for your time. This was really informative, and I think will help a lot of people. So thank you,
thank
Audrey.
you, thank you. All right.